everyone. Let me turn my music down. I will. I'm gonna have to take my time this week because, man, this information this week was so, full of it was a lot for my brain to chew on. I had to read really slowly. The trash men have come to pick up the trash. Sorry if you guys can hear them. Okay, so this week we started. Hello. Hi. This week we started the section about. Dadgummit, I didn't bring my book up here. I brought other books, but I didn't bring my home education book. I did pull up the Modern English language version though on my computer. I haven't had to use the Modern English a lot until this section, and I just needed to read it in another form this week in order to really get my head around it. Did you guys feel like that this week? Like it was just really a lot of heavier information than what we'd read up to this point? Hi, welcome. Got a few more people joining us. Okay, so this week has been crazy for us here at our house because we are closing on a house this week. So we have a lot going on, but I wanted to still do my video for last week, what we read. Okay. Yay. Okay. Thank you. I know I'm so excited. I can't wait. It's actually been a really smooth process so far. Hopefully all goes well tomorrow and we get our key. But yeah, we're really excited. This is our very first house to own ever, so it's a big deal. I agree. Thick content this week. It was. I had to read slow, and I had to reread my summary just a minute ago to remember what all she talked about. And man, she really got into the meat of how habits work in our brains, and I was just blown away by how much she had studied and looked into this stuff, and she really did her due diligence before she wrote this book and made sure that she knew what she was talking about. Thank you. Yes, we're so excited. Okay, so this week, you guys please chime in whenever, because I'm not even sure. I'm still processing what she wrote. So if you have something to add, please do, so that I can read your comment and go on that line of thought. But we'll go ahead and get started. So she kind of recapped at the beginning what she had already discussed in the previous chapters, where the most important things are, to have a healthy brain and to get our children outdoors. And those were really huge factors in providing our children this well-rounded and healthy education. And then she gets into habits. And I thought it was really interesting. She talked about herself as a new teacher and how she was super excited to get started. And then whenever she finally did get into the classroom, she was a little disappointed with what she saw, and I guess how she had been taught to teach at that point, and how she felt like it wasn't working the way she thought it would. So that was really interesting to me that, all these years later, I'm not sure how long she had been teaching when she did finally write these books, but man, so much insight, and let's just try to dig in. I'll do my best, you guys. I'm not sure. I'm not going to do this section justice because it was just, okay, so we'll get started. Okay, so I already said she was disappointed to find that her method of teaching wasn't doing what she thought it would at the beginning, and she wondered to herself, where was the lever to lift these little people higher than what they were? And she said that, they were all, most of them, good children from good families, and they, none of them were troublemakers. They were all good kids, but she felt like it was always a one step forward, two steps back kind of deal, this constant swinging back and forth, and she felt like there was no progress being made in the classroom the way she had expected it to. Let's see. while she found sound ideas through educational literature and religious teachings, she felt as though much of education was little more than a swinging forward today and back again tomorrow, with little sensible progress from year to year beyond that of being able to do harder sums and read harder books. So something was still missing. I wrote down several points. One was to use a child's good habit to help establish their good nature and introduce good habits to change bad ones. But the only way to strengthen their habits into nature was to work on them repeatedly. Yes, over and over and over again. And we'll get into like the nature versus habit here in a minute, because that was just fascinating to me. Hello. Hi everybody. Okay, so she goes on to talk about why children are incapable of steady effort. Let me see, my phone is in the way of my computer screen. There was a warm glow of goodness at the heart of every one of the children, but they were incapable of steady effort because they had no strength of will, no power to make themselves do that which they ought to do. And she goes on to say that this is something that even adults struggle with. And as she said it, I'm thinking, yes, I definitely struggle with this. It's hard for me, if I'm not in the habit of something, to make myself do what I know I need to do. Like, you need to do it, but unless you've formed that habit, like say something like brushing your teeth, for example. Most of us brush our teeth regularly without even thinking about it. But the harder things like meal planning is really hard for me to get in the habit of doing. But if I were to be intentional about making it a habit, it would get easier. So, okay, children should be saved the effort of decision. She said if it's hard for even adults to form these habits and make them a part of their natural in and out of their day, how much harder is it for a child who has a weaker self-will than we do? So it shouldn't be left for, we can't just throw them out and expect them to grow these good habits. It's our responsibility as their parent and their educator to help them grow into these habits. So she gets into, what is our nature versus our habit, like Kaylee was just saying. That's what I love most about her method. I began applying it to me first. Yes, so much of what she wrote this week was really convicting for me, and thinking of my own habits, like bad habits I need to break or good habits I need to work on and really get better at. Yes, I agree. And I think, like you said, if we get better at dealing with these things in here, it will be, I think too, you'll have more compassion for your children as they're forming their habits, because I think if you don't think of it in that way, it's kind of easy to be like, well, why didn't you do your spelling? Why didn't you do your handwriting? You didn't do this good enough. But whenever you're working on it yourself, I think you can be more understanding of, yeah, this is hard. I know it's hard to make this habit. I know it's hard to do the best job every time. But, I know, and I've been there too. Let's work on this together, and let's just keep trying. Every day we'll do a little bit more and get a little bit better. Yes, ma'am. Teach them young. Yes, and she mentions that later as well. Okay, I forgot y'all, I'm nervous about this week because I feel like I told my husband I'm not going to do this section justice. So I'm more nervous this week than I have been in any of the other weeks, because this is just really deep stuff. Okay, so what is nature? So she mentioned that she had heard this phrase, habit is 10 natures, in Bible teachings or at church. She'd heard it a million times, but she never before she started teaching, hadn't really considered how that would affect education as well. And she wants us as her readers to understand what nature and what habit even are. So before she gets into the actual habits we need to form, she laid out to us, what does this even mean? What does nature look like? What does our human nature look like? What do these habits look like? And how do they affect the people that our children are becoming? She starts at the very, base. Like, every human across the globe is born with these let's see, what did she call them? We all have the same kind of moral laws and, let me see. Sorry guys, I'm babbling. Everywhere has felt the desire of esteem, which is a wonderful power in the hands of the educator. And then she goes on to talk about how even in the most remote civilizations, certain things lie within the boundaries of this natural law that humans live within, like lying, hatred, disobedience to parents. All of these things are viewed negatively, even if, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you are religious or not, it's like this global understanding that this is what it means to be human, I guess. And we follow along these lines. Of course, some people break those rules, obviously, but the majority of humanity agrees that, this is the natural law of being a human. So she says, not only is a sense of duty common to mankind, but the deeper consciousness of God, however vague such consciousness may be. And all this and much more goes to the makeup of the most elemental notion of human nature. On top of this basic, this is how humans are, there's also, for each individual, the heredity. What, the passing down of certain traits within a family, for example, such as the taste in music, she says, or the style of handwriting. These things can be passed along as well. So this is also part of the makeup of certain individuals. So first we had like that, the natural law, and then now we have heredity. Plus, she says, our physical makeup, our genetics kind of. Not only physically, but emotionally, thinking of like my dad. I very much have the same kind of personality as my dad. And I think that's just genetics, I believe. I don't know exactly how it all works. That's way beyond my scope of knowledge. But these types of things also contribute to who you are as a person. So she says human nature is the sum of these attributes. Our human nature, heredity, and physical makeup. And she says, understanding all these things together, and how they create a little person's being, she says we may assume that much of who a child will become is out of our control. But she says, don't be fooled. You can change things that need to be changed if you're intentional enough. She says when we allow our children to grow into this human nature without push or pull in any upward direction, we end up with a society full of people who are no more or no better than their human nature. And whenever I read that, I was thinking like the economy package. It's like the very basic, no bells and whistles. This is just, you've been left without any push to be more than you are, I guess. And she said these type of people act as a heavy drag on society. Which, wow, that's a pretty bold statement, but she's right. So while those children whose parents did take their education a step further end up being the few who really make progress in the world, which is our goal, which is probably most parents' goals. But to read, to hear her say these things, it opened my eyes to a lot of, even in our own home, the things we need to be more intentional about. She said, it is unchangeably true that a child who is not being constantly raised to a higher and higher platform will sink to a lower and lower one. Hello, lots of people have joined. Hello. Some people, oh, turn my camera around. Sorry. I didn't mean to push that. Okay. All right, so the problem before the educator is to give the child control over his own nature, to enable him to hold himself in hand as much in regard to the traits we call good as to those we call evil. And she mentioned that the good traits, yes, they are good, but we also don't want to be a slave to our good traits either. And she mentioned like somebody who's generous and they just end up giving their whole life away. You can't be a slave to your good traits either, which I thought that was really interesting because you don't hear that said a lot. It's more about fix what's wrong rather than keep the good traits in check also, because we don't want to be a slave to either. There needs to be a healthy balance between our good traits and our bad traits. I hope that makes sense. And us too. Us too. Having boundaries in the good too. Yes. Okay. Alright, so divine grace works on the lines of human effort. She mentioned a lot of parents expecting God to kind of fill in the holes wherever, we may fall short, which he does. But she says we can't expect God to fill in every hole and just, we throw our hands up and whatever happens, happens. No, we have to be intentional, and we have to, she kind of said what Ben Franklin said. I think it was Ben Franklin that said God helps those who help themselves. So we have to put, he helps us in accordance to our own efforts as well. So we have a responsibility. We can't just expect God to fix all the issues our children have, or that we have. Boundaries, period. Yes, boundaries, period. You're right. The trust of parents must not be supine, which is just what I just said. Nature, then, strong as she is not invincible, and at her best, nature is not to be permitted to ride rampant. Bit and bridle, hand and voice will get the utmost of endeavor out of her, if her training be taken in hand in time. But let nature run wild like the forest ponies, and not spur nor whip will break her in. Wow, that was such a good quote. We can frustrate the grace of God, and I think this is what she's talking about. Right. You're right. And this quote right here, Amanda and I, from the Hemlock House right there, she and I had a little discussion yesterday about the wildness of, we can't just, there has to be this balance between being, yes, we're really free as homeschoolers to do our education as we see fit, but we also can't just let our children run wild, which Charlotte Mason mentioned that a section or two ago. I can't remember which section it was in, but she said we have to find a balance between the child who's cooped up in a schoolhouse all day and the child who runs free out in the country all day. Like, neither of them is the healthiest way to approach education. We kind of have to meet in the middle, and there has to be some form of discipline, but also this ability to, like she talked about a lot before now, be out in nature and be free to explore and be independent in their thinking as well. So we have to find that balance, which is kind of hard. And I think as homeschoolers, especially like in the state of Texas, I don't know where you guys are, you don't have to, what is the word with the state? You don't have to give any proof of what you've done. Like, there's no monthly checkups or whatever. I'm not sure how it's done in other states, but in the state of Texas, it's very, very lax, very loose guidelines as to what your homeschool should look like. So if, like me, you're in the state of Texas, it can be really easy to just, let the kids run wild and not do school. But Charlotte says that we have to have some kind of discipline and habits formed, not just for the sake of their education, but for the sake of the people they're becoming. And these habits are such a powerful tool, she says, in the hand of an educator. Which that quote, I had it way up here at the beginning. I meant to say that quote. Where does she say it? Let me find it. Here it is. If I could but make others see with my eyes, how much this saying should mean to the educator. How habit in the hands of the mother is as the wheel to the potter, his knife to the carver, the instrument by means of which she turns out the design she has already conceived in her brain. so, so good. Such a good quote. It's so true whenever you think about it in the way that she explains it. I wrote down the quote, "What we can do for them all is to secure that they have habits which shall lead them in ways or order, propriety, and virtue, instead of leaving their wheel of life to make ugly ruts in miry places." I have that quote written down too. That's in my notes because that one was a really good one. Let me find my spot again. Okay, so now she goes on to explain how habit can take the place of the nature of the child, or the, meaning the bad habits, I guess, or the habits we would like to replace. Order, yes, which reminded me of what you were saying. Yes. Okay, so she says, if left unchecked, our habits run in line with these natural inclinations and only become stronger. For example, a cowardly child continually finds a way to escape blame, or a selfish child has a habit of keeping everything. In contrast, a good-natured child has a habit of giving, and so on. So our habit works according to our natural inclinations, our human nature, our individual human nature. But she says habit can be the lever that she talked about to lift the children higher than what they are naturally. She says when implemented correctly, habit can lift a child out of his less than desirable natural tendencies by working contrary to them. Some straightforward examples would be how children learn not to potty in their clothes, or as they get older, they learn not to spill the beans about everything that goes on in the privacy of your home, or they learn to be courteous and respectful to their elders. And then she says there are also these children who don't learn any of those things. But we, as mothers, we are constantly forming habits in our children, whether we realize it or not. And she says some of these habits, whether good or bad, they've been brought into their mother, or brought into by their mother over the course of time. In fact, there's nothing a mother can't bring her children into. Most mothers have already instilled some habits into their children without even realizing it. Wow. I just think of my own children and these habits that they have, and I'm like, why do you do this? But it's because I, unwillingly allowed them to form this habit. If I had nipped it in the bud forever ago, it wouldn't be an issue, My tiny people do so much better if I have more structure to our days. It's a habit I need to work on because I am such a spontaneous person. I struggle with that too. I really do. I love to plan things out, but I'm not so good at actually doing all the things I've planned. That doesn't even make sense. But that has been my struggle since we started homeschooling 8 years ago. Or my oldest was in kindergarten. Now he's in 7th grade, and I've struggled with that all along because it is a discipline, and it's hard if we're not in the habit to sit down every day and do the same things every day just to make, to be in that habit of getting those important things done. So I struggle. I'm right there with you. I struggle with that too. Yep. And she said that if we form their nature, they will show it whether they are around us or not. And if we teach them well, they won't cross us. Yes, that's true. Have you ever had your kids say something really embarrassing in front of people? I have. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, did my kid just say that? Yeah. Okay. So a mother forms her children's habits involuntarily. But, so a mother who approaches these habits with intention can easily build the desired results she's looking for. So there's so much, we have so much, I hate to use the word power because that sounds like you're a dictator, but that's not what she's talking about. You're not ruling your children. You're guiding and initiating these healthy habits and forming the result that you really hope for your children to be. Oh no! My 4.5-year-old said pain in the ASS last week. Oops. Okay, my sons have done that too. Say bad words. Yikes. Okay. Not yet, but my oldest is only 2, so the time is coming. Yeah. Be prepared. They watch everything. They are little sponges and they absorb all of it. Okay, so habit forces nature into new channels. And I believe it's further on when she talks about the ruts in our mind. But that I can't wait to get to that part because it was so good. This statement of habit forces nature into new channels, it's obvious all around us. Look at like athletes, gymnasts, acrobats. They're amazing at what they do. Why? Because they have worked so hard and started early in forming these habits and training their bodies physically to do these amazing things. It's empowering to realize we're not helpless in overcoming their bad habits and guiding them to become who God created them to be. Yes, it is empowering. I felt like a sense of peace in reading this. I think sometimes I get overwhelmed with, the things my boys do, like that I've mentioned a couple of weeks ago. They love video games, which I'm not against video games, but whenever it becomes like you're a bad habit, for the mom, it's overwhelming to, how do I break this habit? You almost feel helpless of, yes, I want them to enjoy the games, but like you said, it's empowering the things that she wrote about you can take this into your hands and mold it and, change these habits. It's possible. You don't have to feel hopeless or helpless about whatever habit it is that your kid you feel like is a struggle for you to change. Sort of a side note, have you read The Whole Brain Child book? I feel like Mason would have dug it. I don't know if or what neuroscience consisted of in her day, but she was so spot on. I agree. I have not read that book. I need to write that one down. I don't have a pencil. I didn't bring a pencil. I have to, wait, hold on. I do think I've heard of that one. Let me write that one down. The Whole Brain Child. You guys give such good recommendations. You have read it, and it's really good. Okay. Well, I need to look into it. Yes, I don't know what, obviously there were studies done on, like, neurological and physiology and stuff at that time. But, man, she did her homework. She knew what she was talking about. She was passionate about what she did and she was passionate about her craft. And, man, we're blessed to have her writings. Hi. Okay, check your library. I found it there. I'll have to look. I wrote it down, so I'm going to look. Okay. Parents and teachers must lay down lines of habit. So the idea of habits as powerful forces, Charlotte says, this wasn't new to her. So she's still like laying out how she came to the conclusion that she did about habits and how it affects education. So she said the application of these habits in order to raise, train, and educate children rightly was a revelation, which I think for us too, it's been kind of a revelation. And understanding how habits impact the brain were also a new idea for her. So she began to understand that parents and teachers are responsible for laying down the lines of habit for their children, and this is paramount to setting their children on the right trajectory. And like I said, not just for their education, but for the people they will become or are becoming, because she says they're already people, but we are putting them on the right, we're putting on them on a certain track. Which track do we want to put them on? Because they're going somewhere, and where they end up is really, a lot of it rests on our shoulders as their parent, and if we're homeschoolers too, as their educator as well. Hello, Mama. That's my mama. It takes about 21 days to build a habit. Yes, I've heard that many times. Okay, so we think as we are accustomed to think. This is where she started talking about the ruts in your brain. This really opened my eyes to my own habits and thinking. She said, children are oftentimes too inexperienced and immature to understand that of the many roads of thought going on in their brains, some of them are incorrect. So who is to help them in making their way through the many thoughts in their brains in order to follow the correct ones? Charlotte says it's our responsibility as their parents. He depends upon his parents. It rests with them to initiate the thoughts he shall think, the desires he shall cherish, the feelings he shall allow. Only to initiate. No more is permitted to them. But from this initiation will result the habits of thought and feeling which govern the man, his character, that is to say. So she says, it lies in our hands, and we are to initiate, and like I mentioned a second ago, not be controlling. That's not what she's talking about. We don't control their every thought and emotion, and that's not our purpose as their parent, because one day we'll send them off into the world and we want them to be capable of thinking their own thoughts. But she said it's our responsibility to initiate these thoughts, these desires, these feelings that children have and maybe can't sort out themselves, which was huge. I had never thought of like all the thoughts that go on in our children's heads. Like even for me personally, oh my gosh, my brain is just always going a million miles per hour, but I have a lot of control over what, I think about and what I allow into my brain or whatever. But children don't have the life experience that we do to say, okay, this is the right train of thought to follow or this one's not, and to get rid of the not so good ones and follow the good ones. So that was really interesting to me to read her thoughts on that. Okay, so she talks about the direction of lines of habit. She uses that metaphor as tracks, like a train. I feel like my brain's never off. Can't be their Holy Spirit, but we lead them. Yes, you're right. You're right. And help them to discern the best road to take, whether in thought or action. Okay. So she said it's so much easier for a train to run smoothly upon tracks beneath it than to go off the tracks, because that's disastrous. We've seen what happens if a train goes off the tracks. It's a disaster. But she said it rests with the parents to consider well the tracks over which the child should travel with profit and pleasure, and along these tracks to lay down lines so invitingly smooth and easy that the little traveler is going upon them at full speed without stopping to consider whether or not he chooses to go that way. And again, setting them up for the future as well. Let's see. Habit rules 99 and 100 of our thoughts and actions. So she explains that we don't make our children creatures of habit. They already are creatures of habit. They were born that way. We're born as habitual people. All of the decisions we make day in and day out are solely based on habits that we've been grown into over time. And they take no active will to decide upon. Like I mentioned, brushing our teeth. You just brush your teeth because that's what you do, But of course, there are those circumstances where a decision we have to make, we do have to tap into our will rather than our habits. And we can't save our children from having to do these things too. It's going to happen. There are people in this world, they're going to come against circumstances where they have to make a decision that is bigger than just the habits they've created. So she says what we can do for them is to secure that they have habits which shall lead them in ways of order, propriety, and virtue, instead of leaving their wheel of life to make ugly ruts in the miry places. And that was what the quote that Kaylee mentioned earlier, which is such a good quote. We're preparing them to make these right choices for their own good, not just because we want them to be a certain way. Okay, I've said it a million times already, but it's all for their future as well, not just their education right now. And so habit still plays a part, though, in these big decisions. And you want the habits that you've helped them form, help to inform them later down the road to make the right decision. Like she gives the example of a boy who loves books. He's not likely to fall into idleness just because his friend does, because he's in the habit of loving books. So that's what he does. He doesn't have to, question his, it's not cool to read or whatever, the deal is. This is something that he's confident in and secure in. So he knows that this is the right decision. Or she says, a girl who's in the habit of being honest. She's not going to have to think of a lie to get out of a scrape because she's just an honest person. So that was, okay, that's where the line was leading. Let's see. She said, where exactly does this power of habit come from? And how are we certain that we're not simply polishing up outward behavior rather than our true goal, which is getting to the heart of these issues? You're reading everything I've underlined. But there was so much good stuff to read, and it's hard for me to just pick out a few sections for my summary because I want my summary to, wrap up what we read, but not be forever long too, in case somebody's behind and needs to catch up. But there's so much good stuff, especially in this section. I felt like I was underlining everything. I wrote down how a habit is easily picked up by them, so we have to be on the lookout for good habits to encourage and bad habits to put a stop to. Yes, that is so true. Would that be more of a child's nature versus habit? What are you referring to? Because I'm not sure when you started typing that. Okay, so I'll wait for your response. The physiology of habit. And this is where she continued talking about the ruts in our minds and how they affect where our thoughts go. And she talked about how even in our physical bodies, how our muscles are trained to do certain things because they just have to. They have to form themselves according to the modes of action required of them. Like a child holding his pencil correctly. The hand just has to learn because it's, the child doesn't consciously think, my pencil has to do this. The muscle just forms naturally to that over, doing it over and over again. And she says it's the same. Oh, well, also she mentioned that this is why children should learn things like athletics early. I missed your question. I keep having people calling me and texting me. I've never had my phone this busy. It's okay. Well, if you think of it, let me know. Okay. She mentioned that this is why they should learn like sports or swimming or dancing or music. Start them early so that their muscles have already adapted to these things. She says the man whose muscles have kept the habit of adaptation picks up new games, new muscular exercises without very great labor. So other things come easy to him too because he's already in the habit, his muscles are already trained to do these things. She said the longer a person waits to form these habits, the harder it is for them to learn them because they've already been trained in other forms of habits. So I think of like my oldest son, he's really, really tall for his age. So he has struggled with uncoordination, because he's just so tall and he hasn't grown into his body. But we weren't able to get him in sports early on because we just couldn't afford it. It's so expensive. But now we've finally gotten him into football and basketball. And to see the progress he's made just in the past year, it's amazing. Like it really does, getting involved in some kind of activity, whether it's, karate or some kind of physical activity where they're having to train their body, I think has so many benefits. And I wish that earlier on we could have gotten him, especially because he's so very tall, it would have been even more helpful had he started younger for him to learn how to use his muscles correctly. But the progress he's made has been amazing. Okay, so she says, to correct bad habits of speaking, for instance, it will not be enough for the child to intend to speak plainly and to try to speak plainly. He will not be able to do so habitually until some degree of new growth has taken place in the organs of voice, whilst he is making efforts to form the new habit. So these habits take time and patience. Okay, so then she goes on to these moral and mental habits. They also affect us physically. And she says, let's see, these are the less obvious things that we maybe aren't, I hope I'm not running late over my time. I'm not sure how long I've been recording. I don't know what time it is. It's 3:52. Okay, you can only do an hour-long video. I learned that recently, so I don't want to go over my time and it cut me off. Okay, so when we consider that the brain, the physical brain, is the exceedingly delicate organ by means of which we think and feel and desire, love and hate and worship, it is not surprising that organ should be modified by the work it has to do. To put the matter picturesquely, it is as if every familiar train of thought made a rut in the nervous substance of the brain, into which the thoughts run lightly of their own accord, and out of which they can only be got by an effort of will. And she goes on to talk about persistent trains of thought and how our thoughts form so much of, gosh, this section was really eye-opening to me as well, because it got me to thinking about my habit of worry. And I am such a bad worrier, you guys, like to the point that it makes me sick. And this is a habit, and I never thought of it until she mentioned, like, once your thoughts have started going down this path over and over and over, it's like the deeper this rut in your brain gets, and that is just where your thoughts will just go, because that's where they're in the habit of going. And it really convicted me this week as far as my worry, because it's unhealthy for one, it's sinful for another, and it does not benefit me, it does not benefit my family. But the getting out of the habit is what's hard. Have you tried a gratitude journal? It helped my anxiety. I may need to do something like that, because I really struggle with it. And if you ask my mom or my husband, they're always like, oh my gosh, Ashley, stop, turn it off, quit worrying. But I mean, this made it clear to me that this is a habit. My train of thought is in the habit of going just to go down that road, because now it's the path of least resistance. You know, that's where my thoughts always go, so that's where they're going to continue to go. So anyways, that's what that made me think of. And I do have a book that I wanted to mention for that, which I read several years ago. I need to read it again, but at the time that I read it, it was like a balm to my soul, because it really did help me to kind of view my worry from a different perspective and let it go. It's called My Anxious Heart by Linda Dillow. And this one is really good if you're like me and you're worry wart. This one is a good one. My husband tells me to turn it off too. It's hard to undo ruts we get into. It is hard. And I guess you just gotta maybe try a gratitude journal like she set up here. I don't know. Pray about it. I'm not sure what the solution is. Try new habits. You're on the right track with Mason. Yeah, I think in general moms worry more than dads. I think so too. It's our natural tendency. They get off easy. I'm just kidding. I overthink things a lot. Me too. I overanalyze, and it's always like worst case scenario every time. I stress myself out and I stress my husband out. It's not good. So yeah, that's something I really need to work on. Okay, so let's see. Where did she go from here? Talking about... Okay, then she goes on to talk about this artificial reflex actions that an educator can use to get the results that they want. And she used a soldier, for example, that he learns his drills and internalizes them until they're second nature. And she mentioned that, you know, she gave the example of a soldier who's like walking down the street with his meal or whatever, and somebody yells, "Attention!" or something like that, and the guy like drops his food and gets to attention because it's just second nature for him, even though he's not in, you know, at work, he's walking down the street. But she said this is a form of education that an educator should be interested in harnessing. I mean, not that we're going to put our kids through boot camp, that's not what she's saying, but this wiring of the brain that an educator can use to her advantage. It's 5 minutes to the hour. Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we're almost to the end of my summary. That's an awful thing to do to someone. To say attention, is that what? Okay. Okay, so she talks more about the ruts. The object of intellectual education is to create such indissoluble associations of our ideas of relation in which they occur in nature. That of a moral education is to unite as fixedly the ideas of evil deeds with those of pain and degradation, and of good actions with those of pleasure and nobleness. So making these connections in the brains of our children. We must make ourselves aware of the ruts or the lines of habits that our children's thoughts are running along. And I wanted to show this book as well, The 5 Love Languages of Children by Gary Chapman. I think, yes, Gary Chapman wrote this book. And this is a good one for like learning what love language your child speaks and what fills their tank and makes them feel valued and loved. And so that's a good one for, this part made me think of this book. Understanding what is going on in our kids' brains is helpful in allowing us to nurture the good habits and nip the bad habits in the bud. Okay, so in understanding these habitual ruts that are forming within the brains of our children, we're more likely to understand the power of the habits already formed in them. So no longer can we use excuses like, he'll grow out of it. Instead, we must help to actively form the correct habits in our children. And I don't know how many times I've thought that, he's just little, he'll get over it, he'll get past that, he'll learn one day. But really, she says, the earlier you start, the better, because the longer you let it go, the harder it is to correct it. And this last quote was really a good one too. Let me see if I need to read that one. Yes, really good book. Okay, so this last quote is a really, really good one and a powerful one. The actual conformation of the child's brain depends upon the habits which the parents permit or encourage, and that the habits of the child produce the character of the man. Because certain mental habitudes, once set up, their nature is to go on forever unless they should be displaced by other habits. Every day, every hour, the parents are either passively or actively forming those habits in their children upon which, more than upon anything else, future character and conduct depend. So such a good quote, and so powerful, and really gets you to thinking. And like somebody said earlier, really empowers you as a parent to correct these habits that need to be corrected, and encourage the good habits. And I'm assuming that in these next sections that we read, she's going to kind of give us some practical tips about, what habits we should be forming and how to remove the bad habits. And so I'm really looking forward to the next few sections in this chapter about habits. I feel pulled in two directions with that, because I don't want to be too strict with things that are things children do, if that makes sense. I think it's like a really delicate balance, and I agree. I feel that as well. Like, you don't want to be their overlord. You're not like their, dictating ruler. That's not, and I don't think that's what her intention in saying these things was either. It's finding that, the healthy balance between you can be a kid and be crazy and wild, but then also let's be sure that we cultivate these good and healthy things in you too. And hopefully in these next sections she'll give us good tips for how to do these things that she's mentioned in this past section. What can I do when I have older children who didn't learn good habits and the younger children seem to want to follow? So then there's a constant battle. I think it depends on their stage of development too, Kaylee. Yes. As far as the older kids and the younger kids, I don't know. My oldest he'll be 13 in January, and my youngest is almost 3. So there's 10 years difference. And I don't know. There's always like this, like a tide of, I don't know. It's hard to break, like we said, the older they get, to break the bad habits, Does anybody have a good response to that? I'm not sure if I have the best response to that with the older children who are kind of influencing the younger children. I have two of my boys like constantly butt heads, and it's a constant battle here too. And I don't know, we just take it one day at a time, and I try to correct as it's going on, and I always try to explain to the older one, you know, this is you, because you're older and you understand what you're doing, you really have a bigger responsibility because your younger brother might not understand as much, you know, so a lot rests on your shoulders too. So I tried to make him responsible for his own actions as well, because, you know, when you're getting on up in childhood age, you are responsible for your actions, and I can't control every decision you make. I don't know, that's kind of how we deal with it at our house, but it's a constant thing here as well. I haven't found like the solution to cure it, so I don't know. But yeah, you just take one day at a time and do your best. Let's see, my 16-month-old climbs the dining table, but that's not something my 4-year-old does. Right? That's true. Okay, you two are having a conversation. Okay. Alright, so that was the end of... Well, there was one quote that I'm thinking of that I did not read. I'm not sure how much time I have left. It's 4:03. I think I have a couple minutes. Let me see if I can find it. It was about nature being wild. Or maybe I did read it. No, I think I did read it because it talked about how nature can be like a wild pony if we don't like reel it in. And okay, I think I did read that, come to think of it, but that was probably one of my favorite quotes of this whole section about habits. So, okay, I think that, I did have a couple more books to share. They're not like habit training books per se, but they're really good books, and this section made me think of them, and I thought I would suggest them as well. For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. Really good, and her writing is really influenced by Charlotte Mason as well. There's this one, For the Children's Sake, and then there's also this one, For the Family's Sake. And these are both by Susan Schaefer Macaulay, and these are super good, and I highly recommend them. Read that and loved it. This one, yes. I think most people have probably heard of these, but I thought I would mention them too, because this section really made me think of these books, and they're just really good ones. If you guys have anything else, y'all let me know real quick. Otherwise, I think I will end because I think I'm about to run out of time. I hope I did this section justice, you guys. It was such a good section. I'm going to have to reread it at some point because there is so much information to process. I didn't know that second one existed. Yes, it's super good. This one, I like devoured it. It's really good. Habit training is hard but worth it. Yes, it is hard, but it's like the best investment, I think, of our time and effort. This has been great. Thank you so much. Oh, good. I hope that it was helpful. You did. So helpful, actually. Thank you. Yay. Okay. Yay. That's good. I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you for those of you who message me and tell me that you appreciate my videos. That's such an encouragement to me. It really is. You don't know how much that means to me. So I appreciate your encouragement. Good. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. Okay. Well, I will get off because I think good, not food. I knew what you meant. Okay. All right. We'll see you guys next week. 15 pages this week, so that's less than we have usually been reading. So it's a shorter week. So we'll see you guys next week, and I look so forward to discussing this next section. I'll talk to you guys then. Bye, everybody.